Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this Tuesday's MBE Movie News. I am, of course, John Christopher Walsh, as Stephen likes to title me. He gives me my full name, so I've started doing it as well, and I'm here. If you've been here before, and you probably know, I'm here to discuss all of the latest movie news in the world of Hollywood. And, well, beyond as well. We'll not just shoehorn it into Hollywood, but look, I digress, man. Lion King is getting a sequel, as you've probably seen from the title and the thumbnail, and one, Barry Jenkins, is set to direct the follow-up movie. I like what they're doing. First thing I'm going to say on this, I like what they're doing with the discussion surrounding this movie. It's not a sequel, it's not a quasi-sequel, it's a follow-up movie, and I like that. We need to get rid of this sequel word. It's a dirty word. No one likes to hear it. And it's usually followed by misery and failure, because sequels 9 times out of 10 are absolute shit. And they never seem to replicate the success of the first movie. But look, extremely excited about this. This could be the occasion where this movie actually does go on, and if not better, at least equal the success of the Jon Favreau monster hit. We have the man himself. This article's coming in from Variety. He's been out speaking about the announcement that he's set to take on the next chapter in the Lion King story. Incidentally, supposedly focusing on the Mufasa backstory, potentially how him and Scar grew to have this bitter division we see in the first Lion King movie, how they became bitter sort of adversaries, and how perhaps Scar got his scar, and then his name has a direct consequence. But look, the man's been speaking, and he's had this to say. Helping my sister raise 2 young boys during the 90s, I grew up with these characters. Having, the opportunity to work with Disney on expanding this magnificent tale of friendship, love and legacy, while furthering my work chronicling the lives and souls of folk, within the African diaspora, or diaspora. It's a word I've never really had to say that much. It's a dream come true. Look, that's the first thing I thought when I seen this news. I thought, not only is it a great choice, because he's such a good film maker, such a brilliant mind, and a great screenwriter as well. The first thing that came to my mind, aside from that, it being a great choice, is that this is a guy who is really in touch with the African culture, being an African American himself. He's worked on some really great movies, sort of surrounding and focusing in on the African American culture, Moonlight being the primary one, won an Academy Award for Best Picture, rightly so. La La Land, despite liking it, wasn't the best movie that year, it was Moonlight. And then of course, If Beale Street Could Talk, another truly magnificent movie. I was blown away, that touched me emotionally watching that movie. The sort of heartache of this wife and losing her husband to injustice. It was a beautiful story, really beautifully written characters with an emotive core. So that's what this guy brings, and he really is connected to the African American, and not just that, but the African culture as a distant cousin. And with the Lion King being set predominantly on the African continent, I believe, I'm not entirely sure which country it's set in, whether it's a fictional country or not, but with it set in that continent, and him having a real connection to it, and although we are looking at animated lions and hyenas and whatever the hell, wildebeest and stuff like that, animals in general, it's clear that it's got that real, the heart and soul of it, the roots are firmly in the African culture, and just the colourful characters and things that happen on that continent. So it just feels like a match made in heaven for this guy to come in and work on this movie with this great cast. Of course, we have Donald Glover and Beyonce in there, perhaps James Earl Jones if the man's still up to it, with it being a movie primarily focusing on Mufasa and his legacy, his backstory, potentially. They have to move quick, because James Earl Jones isn't getting any younger, and I don't believe there's another person on this planet who can correctly recreate the man's dulcet tones. So he's got a great, strong core of cast there, really talented, widely talented for a wide variety of different reasons. Beyonce can sing, she can dance, she can act. Donald Glover is just a tour de force. There's nothing that man can't do. He can do comedy, he can sing, he can dance, and he can act. And then of course you have the heavy hitters like Seth Rogen and James Earl Jones in there too. So it's such a brilliant, diverse cast. And I just cannot wait to see where they go with this. I was aware of the fact that there was 2 other Lion King movies out in the 1990s, early 2000s potentially. Simba's Pride, I think it was, and The Lion King 1.5. Never watched them, so I can't really look at it from a position of authority or indeed knowledge and say for sure whether this is something they can mine off of. I personally wouldn't like to see that. If you're bringing in Barry Jenkins, he's such, as I did say before, a brilliant mind, a truly fabulous screenwriter I should say, and filmmaker. You want to utilise this man's skill set to the absolute maximum, and the best way to do that is to allow him to write his very own script, his very own unique, original story. And that is going to get me into the next part of this topic, which has intrigued me the most, and I've been saying it for a very long time, and a lot of people have been bitching and moaning and bitching and even more moaning about Disney and the lack of originality and their constant obsession with doing live action remakes, hybrid CGI remakes of classic animated movies from 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago with Mulan. That was 20 years ago, John. But they've been deriding the studio for continuously remaking these old movies, branding them soulless husks, that they are abominations, that why would you want to watch this when you have the classic movies? And look, whilst I can understand that there is certain elements from that which I can nitpick out and agree with, certainly the Lion King from last year is nowhere near as good as the 94 one. I grew up watching it. It was a unique movie at that time. When you remake it, it loses the originality and that unique element, but there was bits of it that I did enjoy, and these people are completely overlooking the primary reason that Disney are doing this. They're doing it because a new generation of kids, younger demographics, will turn their noses up at animated cartoon movies. They won't watch them, man. They are watching CGI, really well animated TV shows. They ain't going to go from watching that to then watching a movie from 30 years ago, which is a cartoon. It's too jarring for them. So Disney have realised this, and in their infinite wisdom have updated these classic stories for a new generation. And if the older people, like me, I'm old now, I'm 31, I'm not part of the young demographic, if they can connect with these new movies too, then they're doing their job. They're doing what Pixar do so brilliantly in conjunction with Disney, ticking all of the demographics and bringing in as many eyeballs as possible, which then allows a movie like what Jon Favreau created last year to gross $1.6 billion at the box office, despite the derision and the shameless little hussies sort of downvoting it. But I digress, I went off on a slight rant there on a tangent. The reason they are doing this as well, though, apart from updating it for a new generation, I've always felt was that they are given the opportunity to prime these movies, these new stories, for sequels and follow-up stories. If they hadn't done it and they just had the animated movies, then there's no position of power for them to then go off and create new stories. We've already got an Aladdin sequel coming out with potentially Will Smith's Genie. Not so much a genie now, but they can bring him back to being a genie, I suppose, but potentially following him, following the actor whose name completely eludes me, who played Aladdin. That's already there. We now have this Barry Jenkins Lion King follow-up story. This is what they've been doing. They're very smart, these executives at Disney. They're very smart, these filmmakers and producers. They know what they're doing. They have their finger on the pulse. They have created these stories for a new generation, and they have now put themselves in a prime position to create sequels moving forward with the new animated techniques, with the hybrid CGI in the case of Mulan. Who's to say that this one couldn't go on and make even more than $1.6 billion? Certainly by the time it comes out, this pandemic will be away. The people will be going back to theatres to watch it. And with Barry Jenkins, match made in heaven for me. You'll get the best out of his actors. He's a fantastic director. He's a great screenwriter. Can't wait to see where they go. I hope it's an original concept. This is going to allow them to build off on the old unoriginal remakes and give us original stories with characters that we've loved for decades. I'm supremely excited for it, and I'm going to move on that note, guys, to the second topic, which speaking about originality and a lack thereof, speaking about Ready Player 2. Of course, we had Steven Spielberg creating an adaptation of the brilliant Ready Player 1 book, which I did buy in Kindle form, and I've still not read. But I did see the movie, So, and I really enjoyed the movie. I have to say, I really enjoyed Ty Sheridan's performance. I thought he was a great leading man as Wade Owen Watts. And of course you did. You had Ben Mendelsohn playing an antagonist again, a guy who's just ready-made for the antagonistic roles. He just has a way about him, doesn't he? He's just perfect. He played the Sheriff of Nottingham in that god-awful Robin Hood movie. And he, of course, played Orson Krennic, director Orson Krennic in Rogue One, and he was a great little pain in the arse villain in that too. Equally brilliant in this movie. I loved this movie. I loved the callbacks to nostalgic pop cultural moments over the course of the last 30 years, 40 years. Be it brands, be it movies, be it video games, just all the little references. It was fantastic. The kind of movie that you have to go and see at least 2-3 times in the theatres, because the first time you are all over the place looking at things, try to keep track of the story. The second time, you may be focusing on the story a little bit more, but then you're still looking at Easter eggs. The third time, you're just completely devoting your attention to finding Easter eggs and little callbacks that you've perhaps missed. I don't know the setup for this second novel. I know it's something that I think it's either just been completed or is about to be completed. So we have a spin-off novel coming out, continuing the adventures of Wade Owen Watts and the gang. And look, this has got Ty Sheridan, his little brain worrying. I'm saying a little brain, that's a little bit derisive. I'm not saying he has a little brain, that's harsh. I think he's got a pretty decent sized brain, because he's put this out. Look at that quote. Impressive stuff. He says, and I quote, "Recently I've had people asking me questions about, a Ready Player 2. Is there going to be a sequel? I think everybody's well aware that Ernie Klein is releasing Ready Player 2. The novel, people, he likes to say a lot. This guy, that's 3 in the last sentence and a half. It's too much. Come on, get your shit together. But I digress, I'll get back into it. But people keep asking me, and I would love to have an answer for you, and I think people, he's done it again, will and can speculate all they want. But I don't really know what the plan is yet. I have my fingers crossed, and of course I think it's great. I think he means. And I loved working on the film, so yeah, I hope we get to do another. And look, what surprised me with this movie was I wasn't aware of how much of a profit this movie actually made. This movie had a budget of circa $100 to $150 million, and it grossed, and I'll try and get the exact figure because that's the type of anal guy I am, it grossed $582.9 million at the box office, so that's quite a sizable profit. Taking into account theatrical cuts, taking into account promotional pushes and promotional campaigns in general, it's got to have made a nice little $150 to $200 million profit there, so certainly a very successful movie from Steven Spielberg once again, a man who went back to his sort of blockbuster tentpole summer release origins with this one. He stepped away from, well, he didn't step away because of course he'd done, I think, The Post, was it? The scandal about, was it Watergate or something, I can't recall, with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep and stuff like that. He'd done multiple, he went back to sort of 93 era Steven Spielberg where he churned out 3 movies in the 1 year, all distinctly different beasts. But look, man, I thought he'd done a great job with this. I loved it. Just for the Shining sequence alone, being a big Stanley Kubrick man and a fan of Stephen King, The Shining, I loved that movie. It's still to this day my favourite horror movie. You've put Jack Nicholson in the role of Jack Torrance, and was it Shirley Duvall? I can never quite get her name. But you combine that, it's just magic, and it's match made in heaven. And the attention to detail that Spielberg put into this movie, creating a combined crafting and creating together in my head there, and it came out with creating. I'll start that again. Creating the Overlook Hotel was deeply impressive, man. And that, and then as I said, Ty Sheridan's performance, the callbacks to pop cultural moments. It was a really impressive movie that I really enjoyed. And I agree with Ty Sheridan, I would be well on board for seeing a sequel. Now that I know that it's had such success at the box office, I think they are probably just waiting on the novel coming out, Ready Player 2 coming out. Then they'll just get the right, perhaps Spielberg again, or the correct filmmaker in to sort of overlook it with a sort of fine tooth comb, if you like, and then adapt it to a screenplay, and then they'll get the wheels in motion and they'll have all of the gang come back again. And look, if it's half as impressive as that first movie, I know a lot of people thought it was a slightly underwhelming movie and that After all of the promotional push, they were expecting something a bit better, but I really enjoyed it. As I said, I've seen it a good few times in the theatres, and I'd definitely be up for seeing a second one. Whether it happens or not, or whether they can recreate the magic again, is another thing entirely. That's for people above my pay grade to speculate. I certainly can't say. I'm a complete plebington, an unknown from the small town of Glasgow in Scotland. So I'm going to move on that note, guys, because I ain't got much more to add to it. To another strange remake possibility here. One that doesn't fill me with quite as much optimism as The Lion King, the headline of the show, and of course Ready Player 2. A return to hackers has been actively considered as the headline of the article, and indeed Shelley Duvall. It is, Howard. Yes, there you go. Not Shirley. I knew it was and it was Duvall. It is Duvall, isn't it? Even now I'm getting confused. Ready Player 1 had a novelty factor. Don't see the point of a sequel. Yeah, well, I suppose so, but if the novel's there and they have made a $200 million profit, you just know the studio will put one out. Whether it should be happening or not, it will happen. Then look, as I did say, Ty Sheridan, great actor, charismatic guy. Just don't see how you top that villainous performance from Ben Mendelsohn, but that's for another day, I suppose. But look, I digress. Back to hackers. This one's coming in from Collider, and I believe it's the filmmaker himself, Ian Softly, who has been speaking. He's done a rather in-depth 45-minute Zoom interview with Collider, funnily enough, and he has had this to say, and it's a very, very lengthy quote. My. It's so lengthy, I can't even fit it in. And look, you've got another one below there, so let's stop speaking about the length of the quote, shall we? And let's get our teeth around it and actually start reading it out, and then I'll break down just why I feel this is an absolutely god-awful idea. We are, I have to say, for the first time in 25 years, and we probably started this conversation a year or two ago, in the aftermath of the 20th anniversary. I'd never even thought it was something that was interesting, because it isn't. Because we'd anticipated something and then it happened, and then it was kind of all pervasive. Whereas what's happened now with the big data and the way that it's actually broke through and become maybe the dominant force in the world in terms of influencing politics and finance and elections, that I think there is a call for the first time ever that the Knights of the Round Table should be woken up to sort of answer the call again, and there are a couple of conversations. He's been on to say this, it was a much more simple landscape at the time in 95. Yes, it was. Wasn't it, Ian? It was better as well, wasn't it? Let's be honest, the 90s were truly Halicon years. I look back very fondly now. Not for football reasons, but everything else was up here, and now it's just a little bit shit. And this is not just the mind of a guy going through a pandemic. This is just reality, man. The 90s were special. But look, I digress. Nostalgia about the 90s aside, let's get back to the quote. It's much more complex now. It's much more dangerous that it would become out. It's much more dangerous that it would become outdated almost as soon as the film is released. But there are certain cast members, certainly the guys who work with Chris Nolan, DNEG, they are approached all the time about it. Why isn't there more hackers? Really? And on the internet, on Twitter and social media, people are asking about that possibility. So it's been explored, but I don't think any of us would want to do it unless we thought it was worthwhile to do. We wouldn't do it as just a commercial exercise. I don't believe you. But there has been interest from kind of mainstream producers. We'll name them then. Stop being so vague. So it's something that's been actively considered for the first time ever, really. This pains my soul. I grew up watching Hackers, and I really enjoyed the movie. I thought it was great. It had a sort of gregarious tone to it, a vibe to it. It was reminiscent of the 90s. And just reminiscent of everything that I remember of the 90s, the dance music, the alternate rock music, grunge, the sort of Prodigy stuff that was going on, that viciousness, that sort of edgy punk nature. That's just typified the 90s for me. This movie is like the 90s in one. And the cast members, man, Angelina Jolie and so on, just fantastic. Johnny Lee, is it Johnny Lee? I'll screw that guy's name up as well. The guy that was in Trainspotting, I'll screw his name up as well. And he's the main man in it. And the big lanky guy, he was brilliant. And the guy that I always mistaken for Michael Douglas, but who's much smaller and a vastly inferior actor. But what I digress, it was a great cast. Fantastic cast. And I'm going very Trump there. It was a great cast. It was fantastic cast. Very strange. We'll not do that again. I know that Trump's debating Joe Biden tonight, and I'm cringing already. But we'll not get into politics. But I don't want to see this happening, because just as I've said time and time again about movies like this from these decades, the likes of the 80s and 90s, you can't capture that same spirit, that same energy, the same innocence. He says it himself, it was a different time, it was simpler. It's much more complex now. People are more insidious, they're more, I don't know, a little bit, they're less naive. Their minds are awoken to everything now, with the 24-hour news cycles and everything you can access on the internet. And I just feel like it's much harder to please people as a consequence of that. And that's why I don't want to see a Back to the Future movie being made, a remake or anything at all. It's why I don't want to see other bastardised versions of movies from these generations, because they never work out. We were speaking about The Thing recently. They're talking about remaking The Thing again. Didn't work the last time they tried it. And it's because they're movies of their era, of their decade, and you can't take the spirit of that decade and implant it into now. It's a duller, shiter time now. People are they're wired differently. So no, don't do it, man. And even now, I'm going to have to search it up and see if it is Johnny Lee Miller, man. I hope it is. I hope I'm not tripping out my nut. It better be Johnny Lee Miller. Thank God. Jesus Christ, man, I'd have cried. Matthew Lillard was absolutely fantastic in that movie, incidentally. He was the heart and soul of it. And I just loved that, man. I loved all the characters in it. I loved the sort of vibe of each individual character. They had that punkish nature, as I says. But look, don't remake it again, Ian. Please don't. Leave off. Don't touch with an 8-foot barge pole, because it's not going to be a success. And these people who are asking about it on social media, these supposed mainstream producers, tell them to bolt, as we like to say here in Scotland. And Chris Nolan ain't interested in doing a Hackers remake. You are talking absolute shit. But look, on that note, guys, I'm going to move on to, that's not the correct macro at all, that's from last night's show, to the blog rundown, where I break down the last 3 movie reviews, which I didn't touch upon on the last show, where I done a blog rundown. This is essentially, if you're watching for the first time, a part of the show, a little segment where we briefly summarise 3 movie reviews from our array of fantastic writers on our blog at movieburnerentertainment.org/blog. We throw them a bone, in a sense, because they're really brilliant writers. And look, it's a little bit of self-promotion as well, because me, Stephen and Kevin, fellow movie burner, wrote our own movie reviews a couple of years ago. And look, if you want to go over to the blog and get non-biased, non-ulterior motive-ridden movie reviews, then there you go. Go there and look at those movie reviews. But look, guys, the first one coming in is Z. It's from 2019. Try and bring, that's not the right macro again. I'm having a mare. And this one was reviewed by the Belgian maestro Peter Pluimers. I hope I'm saying it right. You did say to me, Peter, last week that it was the 3rd version of saying your name that was correct. I didn't even go back and check it. I hope it's Pluimers. I'm going to stick with Pluimers. But wait, man, this is a very interesting little revenge. Not revenge, that's the next one. Interesting little demonic boy, imaginary friend movie. And he says in his opening paragraph there that it's a story which has been done again and again and again. And he's right. And I watched The Prodigy as well, and I actually quite liked it. And that was all about reincarnation and weird shit where within that movie. And I love these movies, man. I liked the likes of Damien when I was younger. I was a strange kid. I got to see the likes of It and the Tim Curry It, the more terrifying one, and Nightmare on Elm Street. I was exposed to some horrendous films growing up, and I got to watch it was Damien, wasn't it? I'm having a complete breakdown here mentally. But I watched so many of these movies with this sort of story, and you're right, it's a slightly oversaturated concept. But by all accounts, this one's very different, and it takes a twist halfway through the movie, and I like the twist that you're suggesting. It's all very Donnie Darko, whereas perhaps something happened earlier on in life. It's created a sort of schism psychologically, and it flips the sort of perspective onto the mother as a result, and I love that, man. But look, I digress. Summary of the review. I can't say the film Z was really scary. Maybe deliberately not depicting the phenomenon Z explicitly does cause some tension. I like that as well. When you have an invisible antagonist who's manipulating things in the shadows, that's great. That's why I really enjoyed the latest Invisible Man movie, because he was invisible for most of it, and I was actively looking to see if I could spot him in corners and stuff like that. It adds a degree of psychological claustrophobic sort of essence to the movie, and it's an enjoyable aspect when you sort of pair that with the horror genre. A cleverly applied gimmick so the viewer's imagination has to do most of the work. As I says, I enjoy that. With a terrifying wall drawing as inspiration. It's like Bird Box again, isn't it? Ultimately, it's mainly the mood that's essentially Brightburn in this film. In hindsight, the film covers different topics: UFO, growing pains and parental concerns, nightmarish phantoms and unresolved trauma. As a parent, you'd expect your offspring to inherit some of your character traits or personal qualities. However, in Zed, this legacy is not something you'd expect. And even though this delusion isn't excessively visualised here, its presence is certainly felt in the dark, grim scene. I love it, man. I love the concept of it. It's a story that's been done time and again, and I like that little psychological edge you're throwing in there for good measure. I love psychological horror movies. They are the best horror movies. I mean, they're done correctly. There's nothing quite like it. But look, I digress. Moving on. The Way Back is the next one. I remember reacting to the trailer of this. This was, of course, the Ben Affleck rags to riches sports story, and as Peter does rightfully say in this review, this is another hugely oversaturated concept. We have seen this many, many times over the years. We've seen it in a whole variety of different mediums over the years, not just movies, but video games as well. The last time I played Madden, I played the sort of career superstar mode, and it's a similar concept. Ailing high school basketball team, college basketball team, rags to riches story. So it has been done again and again. I do agree with what he says there in the middle paragraph, if indeed it is, where he sort of critiques Ben Affleck's career choices to date, and he's right. He's made some truly horrific career choices. He's made some pretty good ones as well, though. And he's a great actor when he puts his mind to it. And I suppose this is the one redeeming aspect of this movie for Peter. I haven't seen the movie myself, but certainly got that vibe from the trailer. And this was going to be primarily about Ben Affleck's character hitting the bottle. He's lost everything. He's got some real demons. Him picking himself out of the gutter, sort of I can't even think of the word. It doesn't. I was going to say a fancy pants word there, but I'll rein it back in. Sort of getting back on the rails in a sense, and obviously that having a feel good effect on the basketball high school team that he's actually teaching or coaching even. But look, I digress. Summary of the review in short. The film won't win a prize in the category of originality. The already well-trodden paths of previously released sports dramas are followed too carefully. But what Ben Affleck demonstrates here, and I know I'm repeating myself, makes this movie effortlessly exceed the average. And finally, only the way and period in which he defeated his demons felt romanticised. And finally, you should not confuse this film with the 2010 film of the same name about a Polish prisoner who could escape from a Russian gulag with some fellow sufferers. Sounds much better, I have to say, Peter. I like movies like that. The only similarity the Ben Affleck film has with the latter is that the road followed by the group of young people is also full of obstacles, and giving up is also not an option. So if you run into it anywhere on VOD channel, give it a try. It's really not a waste of time. And I like the concept of this being originally supposed to release out in theatres, and by all accounts the coronavirus put the spanner in the works for that. And look, I agree with what Peter says in this review. This is not at all a movie which deserves to be seen in theatres. It's not a big blockbuster release. This is absolutely fine being consumed on a streaming service or VOD. I firmly believe, I keep repeating myself on this, that we will see a new landscape post-COVID where movies like this are just destined to go to streaming services, VOD, places like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV Plus. They're putting crazy money into these streaming services, and they need movies like this, heartwarming mid-tier movies. Leave the theatrical releases to event movies, cracking little indie movies that deserve eyeballs, and big blockbuster releases. I think that's the direction we will see for the studio. John, stick with that pronunciation. It's the right one. Plough-Mers, thank the Lord. Thank you, Peter. So I will stick with that. I thought it was, but look, you need to be corrected at times, and if it wasn't, correct me, man, and don't just be kind to me, because it doesn't work. I can take it on the chin. I'm a big boy. But look, I digress. I'll move on to the final review. It's also coming from Peter Plough-Mers, and this is perhaps the most interesting review of the lot, I have to say. A very intriguing sounding story. An Eye for an Eye, by all accounts, is the English name of this movie. QUIEN, HIERRO, Mata. Can you tell I don't speak Spanish? much prefer learning German. I'm forgetting the Germanic roots in me, I love Germany. I hated Spain, Spanish. I don't hate Spain, that's harsh, but I hated learning Spanish, going to school. I really wish they gave us more interesting languages, but I digress. This is certainly an interesting movie, and it's a Spanish foreign language film. It's a revenge movie with a twist. As Peter does say, it's not like the John Wicks of the world. It's not like the other revenge movies we've seen over the course of the last 10 years or so. I've seen a wide array over the last 3 years or so, the likes of Peppermint and Death Wish and Atomic Blonde, and that other one with I always forget, with the Russian model playing the sort of Bond assassin, and of course John Wick. So I've seen a wide array of different revenge movies, and when they're done well, they are done well. But the one common sort of the one common thread is that they are sort of slick, well choreographed, quick-paced movies. This one, by all accounts, is a slow burner. It's a little bit more psychological in the way that the protagonist, borderline antagonist, takes out his foe, if you'd like, a guy who's wronged him, a bit of a shithead by all accounts, a sort of mafia head. And I'll read the summary and sort of summarise. I always want to say summarisation. I don't know why. It's way too long a word. And summary, John, there's a shorter word you should be using. I admit it, I've been pleasantly surprised by Spanish language films several times already. After Aterridos, I recall reading about that. That sounded very interesting. And El Hoyo. I also thought this was a successful film, certainly not a disappointment, after I started watching it on Netflix without any prior knowledge. First of all, you think this is an average revenge movie with the same known storyline, as it says, but this soon changes due to the sudden twist and the shocking denouement. It's wonderful to see how they've managed to change the tone of the film from ordinary to moderately chaotic aggressive. That's a great term of phrase, moderately chaotic aggressive. That probably sums up my life. I am a moderately chaotic aggressive person at times when people push the right buttons. Love that. I'll be using that in the future. Thank you, Peter. The film shows you how deep-seated hatred can change a person. It's not an exceptional film, but it's relentless and definitely worth watching. I was just wondering one thing. How is it that this retirement home didn't simply refuse the admission of a known and feared drug lord? Well, you know the reason for that, Peter, and that's because he's a known and feared drug lord, and he would probably gut them if they did try to refuse. Well, his family would gut them, because they probably wanted shot of him. These two sons, by all accounts, absolute shitheads as well. So yeah, and you wouldn't have a story like this if they didn't allow admittance of this nefarious drug lord. I like the concept, man. I like the slow burn psychological sort of revenge thing where he slowly just gives this guy an absolute agonising end. By all accounts, he's slowly becoming paralysed, and yeah, I love it, man. It almost puts me in mind of The Long Game, that old, even not slang old, although it has its place as well. Old's this old lang syne. It's a slightly different word to old, but it's not the one I was meaning to use there. It was like the old guy from Breaking Bad, the old what was he, Colombian or something guy who was wheelchair ridden. He pressed a little bell. Everyone thought he was losing his marbles, but he was playing the long game to bring down Gustavo Frings. Almost reminds me of that. I love that sort of perversive long game where you just take them down. It's great, and it has its place as an aside to these sort of quick, slick, David Leitch style, Chad Stahelski action revenge movies. But wait, I digress. That's going to round up the blog rundown for today's show. I'll end it by urging you to go over and read some brilliant reviews from the likes of Peter Plowmers, D.M. Anderson, Steve Wilkins, Gianni DeMaia, and even us. Me, Stephen and Kevin have fired them out, as I did say, so you'll not be disappointed. We have something for everyone. We've got small little independent movies right up to the big blockbuster ones. And look, if you want to go over and read these unbiased reviews and sort of wet your anticipatory juices for what you could perhaps be getting out of these movies if you've not heard of them, then go to movieburnerentertainment.org/blog. But look, guys, I'm going to move on to the fourth topic and the penultimate topic at that on tonight's show. And look, it's once again speaking about the brilliance of a man that was Chadwick Boseman. I mean, we've seen some glowing eulogies for this guy since his sad demise just over a month or so ago. And it really has filled everyone's hearts with sort of sadness, profound sadness for what we've lost, because this was a brilliant guy, and everyone who had seen him on the screen, who'd seen him speak, not just on his social media platform, but actually physically in press junkets at big sort of press conferences. You could see the goodness of the man, you could see the brilliance, the articulate nature of his mind. Just a bright, brilliant guy. But this is a side to him which perhaps we hadn't seen, and again, this speaks volumes for how humble a guy he was. First of all, he didn't want to worry the world with his actual battle with cancer. He wanted to keep it private, by all accounts, a deeply private man. But we see this humble, this humility again, and he keeps something like this under wraps, and it isn't until he passes away and Sienna Miller reveals it herself that we see just how good a guy this was. And I'm of course talking about this story that's come out over the last day or so. Sienna Miller was speaking about her experience on the set of 21 Bridges, one of the last movies that Chadwick of course has starred in, and she revealed that the man shared some of his salary with her because she had a dispute with the studio. They refused to give her the money she felt she was deserving of, and this guy decided, look, I'll give you a share of my money, you're worth it, there you go. And I think that's incredible. What an incredible gesture that was from the man. And the fact he didn't, as I said, make it public is incredible as well in itself. But I digress. This is what Sienna had to say. She says, I said I'll do it if I'm compensated in the right way. And Chadwick ended up donating some of his salary to me to get me that number that I had asked for. He said that was what I deserved to be paid. She went on to say down below there, it was about the most astounding thing that I've ever experienced. That kind of thing just doesn't happen. He said, you're getting paid what you deserve and what you're worth. It's just unfathomable to imagine another man in that town behaving that graciously or respectfully. In the aftermath of this, I've told other male actor friends of mine that story, and they all go very, very quiet and go home and probably have to sit and think about things for a while. But there was no showiness. It was, of course, I'll get you that number because that's what you should be paid. And look, again, this just speaks volumes for the guy's character. What a brilliant guy he was. What a truly massive loss he is, not just for what he'd have brought in his film career and future roles, and he'd have knocked the ball out of the park. He was just a tremendously talented guy. But the loss of that emotional side of things, the character, and that loss primarily for the black community as well, it's a chasm that's not going to be filled in for a long, long time. But even his co-stars, and this is what you're losing, a guy like that, that's a rare beast. People who are willing to give up their own fortunes, their own wage, salary, whatever you want to call it, to help out a fellow human being. That is just about one of the greatest gestures I think you can do. And look, it speaks volumes for him, man. I can't really praise this guy enough. I've watched every movie he's been in, and he's just touched me on an emotional level with every performance that he's starred in. And yeah, tragic loss. It shocked me at my very core when I found out that he'd passed away, and a month later, still can't believe the guy's not here. And again, even a month later, we're still getting amazing, touching stories about what this guy meant to so many people. And look, yeah, tragic loss, sadly missed. And I felt I'd touch upon it because it was such a heartwarming story. But look, guys, I'm going to round up the show by touching upon a slightly less heartwarming, slightly less exciting story. It's ending the show. It's filler. I like to hit a nice round, even 5 topics per show, and I flung this in. I think the other one was something about some load of crap story. I can't even recall, even though it was that unimportant. It's drifted right out of my brain. But look, this one's about Chris Hemsworth, Jurnee, Smollett, and Miles Teller, if I can speak, joining the cast of Spiderhead. And this is a Joseph Krasinski latest movie. I think has seen his latest film top. No, it may not be. I might be talking absolute crap, but I think it is. I think it's a Joseph Krasinski movie. It's going to Netflix, and yeah, Chris Hemsworth is continuing his relationship with Netflix. Of course, the man was in Extraction fairly recently, and it was a very successful. Some, I think, were arguing perhaps the most successful Netflix movie to hit the platform in a long, long time. And they're continuing this relationship with him. They're continuing it with an unbelievably talented cast. And look, it's by all accounts a really interesting concept too. It's set in the near future. Convicts are offered a chance to volunteer as medical subjects in this sort of prison to shorten their sentences. And 2 specific prisoners become test patients for emotional altering drugs. And this forces the prisoners to grapple with the difficult past in a facility run by a brilliant visionary who supervises the programme. This sounds like a brilliant concept. They're getting in a really talented cast. I want to see Chris Hemsworth starting to spread his wings a little bit here anyway. He's starting to get shoehorned into the sort of action hero, Dwayne Johnson type roles. I mean, we know he plays Thor, and he's great at it. He's done Extraction, and I don't want to see this guy getting sort of pigeonholed in, typecast is probably the better word, into these action roles. I want to see him doing something different, something that tests him as an actor. We've seen a wide variety of different actors over the years start off in different genres and then they spread out and test themselves. I want to see this guy doing it. He gets a lot of criticism about not really having a hugely successful movie out with the MCU, and of course, even if this is hugely successful, as by all accounts Extraction was too, you ain't ever going to find out about it because it's on Netflix, and the nature of the beast is they are very, very secretive, and they keep their figures and their facts firmly applied to the chest, and they don't reveal what the hell's going on. So we'll never know if this is a success, but obviously in an artistic sense, we will know if it's a success if he's delivered a brilliant performance alongside the likes of Jurnee, Smollett and Miles Teller. But look man, I'm excited for it. I like the concept. The story's very interesting sounding, and by all accounts the title, Spiderhead, that sort of conjures up strange, dark thoughts in my brain at a man who's an arachnophobe. Spiderhead. Presume it's sort of the legs come out the head, different directions, emotive thoughts and stuff like that, putting them through the emotional ringer, if you like. But look, I'm done, man. I'm done. And I'm going to move on to the end of the show on that note. Look, guys, what's your thoughts on the topics I touched upon tonight? What do you make about this Barry Jenkins follow-up Lion King movie? Do you think that has got enough about it to be a success? You think the brilliance of Barry Jenkins can step into the greater machine that is Disney and sort of avoid the pitfalls of a sort of Rian Johnson, where a great independent filmmaker sort of falls by the wayside in a big sort of experience, a big blockbuster movie? Do you think he can hit the ball out the park like I do? Do you think this is a chance for Disney to create truly original and imaginative stories off the back of these slightly less imaginative remakes? What is your thoughts on a Ready Player 2 movie? Do you want to see a Ready Player 1 sequel with all of the gang back? Do you think there's enough about that to be a success? What do you make about Hackers? A reboot or a remake, a sequel to Hackers? Is that something you think has a place in the 21st century? What do you make about the bogged rundown movies I touched upon? And finally, the truly brilliant character of the late great Chadwick Boseman sharing some of his salary with a co-star. And what do you make about, finally, this Chris Hemsworth Spiderhead movie? If you've got anything to say at all, you can comment below and let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments section. You can also like the video if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this in the future. And if you do, guys, that's precisely what you'll get: more movie news, more reviews in the future, and reaction videos to a wide array of different movies. But look, until then, bye bye.